The zoning hearing had already been running for nearly 2 hours by the time Monique Carter stood up to speak, and by then most of the room had decided what kind of person she was. To some, she was just another angry homeowner slowing down progress. To others, she was the woman from Oak Terrace who had sent too many emails, asked too many technical questions, and refused to be impressed by glossy renderings and polished promises. To Richard Halpern, the white developer seated at the front of the chamber in a navy suit with a gold watch peeking from his cuff, she was a nuisance. He had the relaxed posture of a man who had spent his life entering public meetings already certain of the outcome. In front of him sat a sleek presentation board showing the future of Brookside Commons, a proposed luxury retail and condo complex with boutique storefronts, rooftop gardens, and underground parking. The project had been described by city staff as transformative, ambitious, and economically catalytic. Those were the kinds of words wealthy developers liked. They made demolition sound visionary. The land in question sat just 3 blocks from Monique's house. That house had belonged to her family for 27 years. It was where her mother had recovered after chemotherapy. It was where her son had learned to ride a bike on the cracked sidewalk out front. It was where Monique had rebuilt her life after divorce, one mortgage payment at a time. It was not a symbol to her, it was her home. And she knew something about that land that the room kept treating like an irrelevant detail. It flooded, not every week, not every month. But when the rain came hard and the creek overflowed, water moved through that corridor fast. It backed into yards, swallowed drains, pushed into basements, and turned ordinary streets into shallow rivers. Monique knew because she had lived through it 3 times. She still remembered carrying photo boxes to the top shelf in the laundry room during the storm 2 years earlier while water pressed beneath the back door. The developer's plan included paving over a large drainage area and building on ground that many in the neighborhood had long understood to be vulnerable. But when residents raised concerns, they were told the design team had everything under control. Controlled, managed, mitigated. All the comfortable words people used when the consequences would happen to someone else. The hearing chamber was nearly full. Residents lined the back wall. Local reporters sat with notepads open. City planning commissioners occupied the dais in a row, trying to look neutral. A projector hummed above them, casting the latest site plan on the large screen behind Richard Halpern. Monique stood when her name was called and walked to the microphone with a folder tucked under one arm. She was 46, wore a dark green blazer over a plain black dress, and carried herself with the self-discipline of someone who knew that in rooms like this, a black woman could not afford to look flustered if she wanted to be heard. She had learned that lesson at work, at school board meetings, at banks, and now apparently at zoning hearings. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Monique Carter. I live on Ashby Lane, inside the impact area for this project." Richard glanced down at his phone before she had finished the sentence. Monique saw it. She continued anyway. "I'm here because the proposal before this commission does not adequately address stormwater overflow, flood risk, or downstream property damage to the surrounding neighborhood." That got a few eyes up. She opened her folder. "I submitted written comments last week, including photographs from the 2018, 2021, and 2023 flood events. I also included a copy of the county drainage assessment and a marked topographic map showing runoff pathways behind lots on Ashby, Fern, and Willow Crest." Richard leaned back in his chair with a faint smile, the kind men used when they wanted to look patient while signaling that the speaker was overestimating her own competence. One of the commissioners, an older woman with silver glasses, nodded. "Yes, Ms. Carter, we received those." Monique turned slightly toward the dais. "Then you know this project removes permeable ground from one of the lowest collecting areas in the district." Before she could continue, Richard stood. "Madam Chair," he said smoothly, "if I may respond briefly." The chair hesitated, then nodded. Richard walked to the side microphone with practiced ease. "I certainly appreciate community passion," he said, smiling into the room. "But I do want to reassure everyone that our engineering consultants have reviewed all relevant water management concerns. This project is fully compliant with current standards." Then he looked at Monique. It's easy to misread technical documents if you don't work in land use. A few people in the room shifted. Monique did not move. Richard continued, almost pleasantly. What feels like a floodplain to a homeowner is not always one in the legal or engineering sense. We have professionals for that reason. There were a few soft laughs from the front row where his associate sat. Not many, but enough. Monique felt the familiar heat rise in her chest, the one that came when someone insulted you carefully enough to remain respectable. She wanted, for one brief second, to tell him exactly what she thought of his professionals. Instead, she rested both hands on the podium and kept her voice level. "Mr. Halpern," she said, "are you saying the flooding documented by residents and county records is not relevant because I am a homeowner and not a developer?" Richard gave a tiny shrug. "I'm saying anecdotal impressions shouldn't override formal analysis." A man in the audience muttered, "That's not what she said." Richard ignored him. Monique said, "What you call anecdotal, my neighbors call water in their basements." The chair cleared her throat. "Let's keep comments directed through the commission." Monique nodded once. "Of course. Then through the commission, I would ask whether the applicant's drainage model incorporates the repeated overflow events from Mill Creek during 100-year rain conditions." Richard answered before anyone else could. "Yes." Monique looked at him. "Can you provide the FEMA panel reference used?" He paused. Only for a second, but it was enough. His expression changed slightly, like a man who expected resistance but not fluency. "Our consultants handled those specifics," he said. "I'm sure they did," Monique replied. "So which panel reference?" Richard's smile thinned. "Again, I don't think this meeting benefits from a technical cross-examination by residents who may not have the full context." There it was, residents who may not have the full context. Meaning her. Meaning the black homeowner from the neighborhood was expected to speak in feelings, not facts. Monique reached into her folder and removed a printed map. "I do have the full context," she said. "I'm a civil infrastructure analyst with the County Transportation Office. I review drainage failures, culvert stress points, and flood response impacts for a living." The room got quieter. Richard's face did not fully fall, but the confidence in it shifted. Monique held up the map. "And the panel reference used in your filing is outdated." A reporter in the second row looked up sharply. One commissioner leaned forward. "Outdated in what way?" Monique turned toward the dais. "The applicant's stormwater summary relies on a superseded flood designation from before the regional update issued last year. The revised map expands the moderate risk corridor behind the proposed parking structure and part of the retail footprint." Richard stepped back toward his table. "That is not correct." Monique looked at him directly. "Then ask your team to display the updated layer." Richard gave a short laugh, too quick. "This is exactly the problem. People pull up internet maps and think they've discovered something our engineers missed." Monique did not answer him immediately. Instead, she looked at the planning director seated near the clerk's desk. "Mr. Alvarez, does the city system have the county GIS connection active tonight?" Alvarez blinked. "Yes, it should." "Then please pull up the current flood overlay for parcel set 14C through 14H. The chair looked between them. "Can we do that?" Alvarez nodded slowly. "Yes." Richard stepped forward. "Madam Chair, with respect, that's highly irregular. We're here to consider the submitted application, not outside materials introduced mid-hearing." Monique answered before the chair could. "The current flood map is not outside material. It is the current regulatory context for the land you want rezoned." That landed harder than anything said so far. The chair turned to Alvarez. "Pull it up." A small ripple moved through the room as the site plan disappeared from the screen. Alvarez moved through a few windows at the clerk's workstation, clicked into the GIS portal, and entered the parcel numbers. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the base parcel map appeared. Then roads. Then contour lines. Then, with one more click, the flood overlay lit the screen in blue. The chamber went silent. Even from the back of the room, the problem was obvious. A broad blue band cut across the lower half of the proposed development site, reaching into the area marked for parking access in the rear edge of the condo building. The drainage corridor Monique had described was clearly visible, tied directly to runoff flow toward the neighborhood behind it. One of the commissioners actually sat back in his chair. Another said, almost under his breath, "Well?" Richard turned toward the screen so fast his chair nearly tipped. "That can't be the final layer," he said. Alvarez adjusted the legend. "It's the current county flood risk overlay updated last September." Monique said nothing. She didn't need to. The screen was speaking for her now. The silver glasses commissioner looked down at the applicant packet, then back at Richard. "Your submission references the prior map revision." Richard recovered just enough to sound indignant. "Then this is a clerical timing issue, not a fatal defect in the proposal." Monique looked at the commission. "With respect, it is not a clerical issue if homes downstream flood because the wrong map was used to justify a rezoning." That drew murmurs of agreement from the audience. A white man in the second row, who had been supportive of the project earlier, raised his hand slightly and said, "I live on Willow Crest. If that's the updated map, why weren't residents informed?" No one from the developers table answered. Richard tugged once at his cuff and tried a different tone, the one men like him used when arrogance stopped working and urgency took over. "Our team can certainly revisit the drainage calculations and resubmit if necessary, but I would strongly caution the commission against overreacting to a single overlay." Monique finally let a little steel into her voice. "It's not a single overlay. It's people's homes." The chair turned to the commissioners. "I think we've seen enough to know this application cannot proceed as presented." Richard spoke quickly. "Madam Chair, we've invested significant time and capital into this proposal, and the neighborhood has invested significant lives into staying dry," the silver glasses commissioner said. That surprised the room. So did what came next. The chair straightened her papers. "Given the discrepancy between the submitted stormwater analysis and the current flood risk map, I am moving that this commission deny the application without prejudice pending full resubmission under updated hydrological review." A second came immediately. Richard looked stunned. "Deny?" The vote was 4-1. When the final vote was read aloud, the audience broke into relieved applause before the chair reminded everyone about decorum, but even she was smiling a little when she said it. Monique stepped back from the podium and gathered her folder. As she turned, several neighbors reached for her shoulder, her arm, her hand. A woman from Fern Street hugged her tightly. An older man she barely knew said, "Thank God you came prepared." One of the reporters was already moving toward her. Richard remained near the front table, speaking in a hard whisper to one of his consultants. For the first time that night, he looked like a man unused to being contradicted in public. As Monique passed, he said, not loudly but clearly enough, "You made this much harder than it needed to be." She stopped and turned toward him. "No," she said. "I made it more honest than you wanted it to be." For a moment he had no answer. Then she walked away. Outside, the night air was cool and damp, and residents clustered beneath the courthouse lights talking faster than before, the way people do after narrowly avoiding something bad. Monique stood on the steps with her folder in her arms and let herself breathe. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her son, Elijah. "How did it go?" She smiled and typed back, "We won tonight." A second later he replied, "Knew you would." Monique looked back through the glass doors at the hearing chamber, at the bright screen now dimming inside, and felt something settle in her chest. It was not triumph exactly. It was something steadier, the kind of relief that came when truth finally got enough light to be seen. For weeks she had been treated like she was emotional, difficult, obstructive, like she was standing in the way of progress because she cared too much about an old neighborhood and a modest house on Ashby Lane. But she had never been standing in the way of progress. She had been standing in the way of negligence. And that night, in a room that had expected her to speak from fear, she spoke from facts instead. The map lit the screen. The room changed. And for once, the people with the least power did not leave the hearing wondering whether anyone had listened.